Hello, 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 everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I'm a Tolkien scholar. And this is the third part of a series of videos where I go and I take Tolkien-related quizzes that are found on the internet, in this case it's YouTube, and sort of grade them to see how accurate they are, how good they are as quizzes, if the answers that are correct are actually correct. And we did 2 of them so far. The first one was pretty bad. It was 40 questions, and there were so many issues with many of them. And it was way too easy, considering that it was supposed to be ultimate and for hardcore fans. The second one was a little bit more casual, but was a much better one, which I gave a B to. This is a quiz from QuizFix. Not a lot of subscribers here, but a lot of views. It's always amazing when you see a lot of people who view a video and then they don't subscribe. I mean, there's more likes than there are subscribers. If you like a video, you should definitely subscribe. And if you like this video, you should definitely subscribe. But let's see what this one's all about. This one's a bit longer than the other one. Well, more than twice as long, but let's get through it. Oh, and the title of this one is Ultimate. It's always Ultimate Lord of the Rings LOTR Quiz Trivia Challenge, 20 questions and answers, quiz fix. Okay. I always forget the Lord of the Rings. I always forget the. Gandalf has 20 questions. Who's your daddy and what does he do? I like the presentation on this one. What is another name for Aragorn? Okay, so these are all names of characters, and they are all names of characters that have multiple names. Of course, most characters have multiple names. The correct answer is D, Elisar, which means elf stone. He's also Strider and Wingfoot and Estelle and a bunch of other names. Thorongil as well. Not Thorongil. Thorongil. Thorongil, which is Star of the Eagle. Elendil, which means a friend of the elves, is actually his ancestor, who was the father of Isildur and Anarion. Olorin, which essentially means a dreamer, is actually Gandalf. That's his real name, is Olorin. And Undomiel is Arwen's other name. It means even star. So yes, Elisar is the correct answer here. Good first question. Let's skip forward a little here. I like the wand showing up. Other names: Estelle, which means hope. Thorongil is Star of the Eagle. Ethelharn is a rather obscure one. Telcontar is actually his family name, or at least the family name that he chooses once he becomes the king. So he's technically Aragorn II Elisar Telcontar, High King of the Dunedain. Telcontar essentially means Strider. Wow, and Vinyatar, that's a very obscure one, Strider. The Dunedain is what Bilbo calls him, but it just means the man from Numenor. Wingfoot is just a nickname, I mentioned it, that Éomer had for him. Whoever did this did some research. This might be the first one I give an A to, but this is only one question of 20. I'm hoping it's as good as that. I love the Lego Gandalf. What race is Gandalf? So we have Idain, which means man. Quendi, which means speaker and refers to the elves. Maiar, which means beautiful and refers to the lesser angels. And Valar, which means powers, and that refers to the greater angels. And so Gandalf is an incarnated Maya spirit. Maya is the singular form of Maiar. So the answer is C. I like it's not just pictures from the movies. We've got art. So other Maiar include Eowendil, also known as Radagast. He was also called Hraundil. Kuramo, which is Saruman. He was also called Tarandor. Durin's Bane, which is a Balrog. And Mairon, of course, he was also known as Sauron, and he had a bunch of other names. Zigur, Anatar, Gorthaur. There were all sorts of different names for Sauron. They're all angels, lesser angels. So far, so good. We're 2 for 2 on this. I'm feeling good about this one. I'm feeling really good about this one. Oh, so we've got sort of like a Rebus puzzle. Guess the character. So we have what appears to be the White Tree of Gondor. It could be the White Tree of Numenor. We have 2 arrows, and we have a horn. And I'm sad to say that I think this is Boromir because he is from Gondor. He did carry the horn of Gondor, and he was slain with arrows. They didn't necessarily say that there were 2 arrows that shot him. There were multiple arrows, but this is almost certainly Boromir. I love the editing. This is the best one yet so far. Hopefully they don't screw it up. I don't want to be like, oh, they screwed it up. All right. Who is the king of the Woodland Realm? Okay, so Legolas is the prince of the Woodland Realm. Thranduil is the correct answer. That is Legolas' father. He's the king of the Woodland Realm in northern Mirkwood. Elrond is not a king. He does live in a sort of a wooded area called Imladris, also known as Rivendell. Celeborn is sometimes called a king. He's really a lord of a woodland realm, but it's called Lothlorien, not the Woodland Realm. And like I said, he's not a king. He's a lord. So the answer is Thranduil. I'm excited! Like, the last one was good, but this is so good. Thranduil, son of Orophyr, was an elven king who ruled over the Woodland Realm in the 2nd and 3rd ages. Also the 4th age as well. He was the father of Legolas. This is absolutely correct. I like the additional lore that they give you. They're putting it into context. It's not all movie pictures. There's music to it. The effort was put in here. This is really good. We got Gollum here. How old was Gollum when he died, approximately? So he was, usually we would say that he was just shy of 600 years. We don't really know his age because we don't know what year he was born or how old he was when he obtained the first ring after murdering his friend Deagle. His real name, of course, is Smeagol. And then he had it for about 500 years before he lost it. And then when he died, that was, like nearly 80 years later. So we can assume that he's probably not 640. We can assume he was a young guy when he got the ring. So maybe he was in his tweens, sort of like Pippin, and like about 28 years old, maybe. And then he, tween, by the way, is a word that J.R.R. Tolkien invented. It didn't always mean, kids that are younger than teenagers. For him, it was a mixture of like teens as in the irresponsible years, but they were in their 20s, so tween. The word was indeed invented by Tolkien. It has a different meaning now, but he meant it for hobbits in their 20s. So he's probably a pretty young guy. He has the ring for about 500 years, and then, nearly 20 years later, he died. Well, not nearly 20, nearly 80 years later he dies. Nearly 60 years later 60 years later, pretty much to the day, is when Frodo got the ring, and then there was 17 years before he started on his journey, and then the journey took about a year. So yeah, you're looking at like 590 is a really good approximation of his age. He's definitely older than A and C. D seems like it's a little too old for him. He could have been older than, a tween when he took that fishing trip. But I feel, judging from the fact that he seemed to live with his grandmother and the sort of immaturity that we see with both Smeagol and Deagle, I would say that 590 is an excellent approximation of his age. I always say he was nearly 600 when he died. Yeah. So, see, now, this I don't like because they put this little C here. So the C on dates stands for circa. And when people say, in this context, he was born circa 3rd age 2430, we don't know when he was born. So a lot of people assume that circa on a date means around that time, that it's not exact. Circa on a date actually means that it is precise. So in this case, it should not have that C there. I'm going to assume that the person who made the video is going by the thought that circa means around. It doesn't. It means precisely. So we know when he died, certainly, but we don't exactly know when he was born. It was probably around that time. I just don't like that C is there for circa. I'm not going to really hold it against the quiz because that's sort of extra lore, but it's a little, Know your Latin a little better, I would say. Tom Bombadil's wife. Now, this is good because Tom Bombadil was not in the movies, so you would have to have read the book. Or even if you saw the Rings of Power, Tom Bombadil was in it, but his wife was not. She was mentioned, but she was not actually in it. And you didn't know that when he said that name that he was referring to his wife. A is the correct answer. It is Goldberry. Gold Dust, Roseberry, and Gold Lily are just not from The Lord of the Rings or anything else. They sound similar, you know. Roseberry sounds like it could be a Hobbit name. Hobbit women usually have very floral names. But yeah, Goldberry is correct. She was the river woman's daughter. Tom is a mysterious figure who lives in the valley of the river Withywindle, east of the Shire. He lives with his wife, Goldberry, daughter of the river, far from any other settlement. I wouldn't say that it's all that far from any other settlement because it's actually very close to Buckland. I would also not say that it's east of the Shire. It's more south of the Shire, not so much to the east. So the information here is almost correct. Like I said, the extra lore stuff, I'm not going to hold against it too much unless it's like catastrophically wrong here. This is not, I would not say this is catastrophically wrong. Okay, we have another guest character. Okay, so we have a figure on a horse with long blonde hair, so we would assume Rohirrim here. We have the White Tree of Gondor again, and then we have what appears to be the head of a beast, perhaps a draconian sort of figure, and a flail with a morning star on it. Sometimes people refer to that sort of weapon as a mace. It is incorrect. A mace does not have a chain. A mace is more like a club with pointed ends. This is a flail with a morning star on it. So this could only be Éowyn, I would say. In the movie version of The Return of the King, the Witch King of Angmar rode upon a beast that appeared vaguely draconian. They were meant to be a bit more bird-like, maybe perhaps similar to pterodons. Coincidentally, as Tolkien stated in his letters, he was not thinking specifically of pterodons when he came up with them, but he did admit that they're pretty similar as these giant sort of bird-like creatures. He called them Nazgul birds. They're referred to in the texts as fell beasts. Like I said, Peter Jackson seemed to interpret them as being sort of like wyverns, you know, but that's not what they were meant to be. He did carry, like I said, a weapon similar to that. No such weapon was described in the book, but he very well could have had something like that. I think a lot of people would get tripped up on this because we see the Rohirrim, and that could be Éowyn riding on the horse in her guise as a Durnhelm. But we also see the White Tree of Gondor, and there's two sort of interpretations here. One is that she did slay the Witch King, and that was in Gondor. Or we could say that after, you know, the events of The Lord of the Rings, she becomes the Princess of Ithilien because she marries Faramir, and he's the Prince of Ithilien, or he becomes the Prince of Ithilien. So she winds up living in Gondor. So she's from Rohan, but she lives in Gondor. This has to be Éowyn. It really can't be anybody else. Éowyn. They got the correct accent and everything. Question 8. Where does the Fellowship of the Ring split up? So we have Minas Tirith, Aemon Law, Aemon Hen, and Lothlorien. Okay, so this is a good one because we have two that are very similar, Aemon Law and Aemon Hen. The correct answer is Aemon Hen, which is where Boromir died, and then Merry and Pippin were taken away by orcs, and Frodo and Sam went off on their own, and then the remaining three went off to chase down Merry and Pippin and get them back. Notice I didn't mention Gandalf. Technically, you could say Moria was where Gandalf split off from them, but this wasn't the entire Fellowship splitting up. They just thought Gandalf had died, and in fact he did die, just not when they thought he did. And then he was resurrected, and they met him in Fangorn Forest. But yeah. So Frodo and Sam, yeah, this is given the same information that I did. Frodo and Sam go to Mordor, Boromir is killed, Merry and Pippin are kidnapped by Uruk-hai, and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli pursue them into Rohan. All right, question 9. Who won the competition to kill the most enemies at Helm's Deep? So we have Legolas and Gandalf and Aragorn and Gimli. All 4 of them fought at Helm's Deep. However, only 2 of them were having a competition. Legolas and Gimli were having a friendly competition to see who could kill the most orcs. And Legolas got an early lead in this because he was using arrows, whereas Gimli was using his axe. And so Legolas was sniping them from the wall, whereas Gimli was sometimes resting on the wall with Legolas, and sometimes he went down to fight, and sometimes he was helping the civilians sort of get to a safer place. But in the end, Legolas lost the competition to Gimli, who killed one more orc. I believe it was 41 over 40, but he was a little bit lamenting that the last beheading that he did caused his axe to get a big notch in it because the last orc that he killed had a spiked collar. And you might wonder, how did he catch up when he wasn't always fighting and when Legolas was using arrows? Because eventually, or I should say rather quickly, Legolas ran out of arrows and he had to use his knives whenever orcs came close to him, or forage for arrows that were spent that could still be used. So that's how Gimli managed to catch up to him. It's possible that Gandalf or Aragorn may have killed even more orcs than Gimli, but they weren't counting, and they weren't having a competition. What is the name of Aragorn's sword made from the sword that was broken? Okay, so this is a tricky one because it was called Narsil when he received it. However, this says Aragorn's sword made from the sword that was broken, meaning that this is the reforged version of it. So the correct answer is A, Anduril. Glamdring is the sword that Gandalf wields. It was used by a king in Gondolin. His name was Turgon, and it was forged, I believe, I think it was Eöl that forged it, although I could be wrong about that. Well, Eöl forged a bunch of great swords. I don't think it was Eöl, actually. He forged a bunch of swords, but I don't think that was one of them, because he liked to use that meteoric iron. So it was probably just one of the elves in Gondolin that specifically forged it. Helgrim is not a sword from the Lord of the Rings, so... But yeah, Anduril, Narsil is almost correct, but it specifies it was made from the sword that was broken. Narsil was the sword that was broken, and here it explains it very correctly there. After the War of the Last Alliance, the shards of Narsil were taken to Rivendell. Elrond hung on to them until Aragorn turned 20 years old, and he gave him the shards of Narsil, and he told him what his real name was, because previously he was called Estel, and he told him about his heritage. What causes Merry and Pippin to grow taller than other hobbits? So it's not faster aging in Fangorn. There's no such thing as faster aging in Fangorn, and that wouldn't make them taller, since even though Pippin is younger, he's still, he's fully grown. He's just not matured fully. It's actually the Ent drops, the water that the Ents drink, and it makes them bigger. And as a matter of fact, Merry, who is the taller of the two, becomes essentially the tallest hobbit to ever live, taller than Bandabras Took, which was an ancestor of Bilbo's. He was also called Bull Roarer. It wasn't Ent magic, although you can make an argument that it is magic and it is of the Ents, but it's specifically the Ent drops, certainly not elven food. Sorry about the dog whining. Yeah. And by the way, the fact that they only grew a few inches, but still Merry became the tallest ever hobbit, meant that Merry was likely already unusually tall for a hobbit. They do mention a few times, specifically in the Two Towers, that Pippin is smaller than Merry, but they never mention exactly that how tall Merry is. So it's sort of interesting that, he becomes the tallest ever hobbit just from growing a few inches. All right, we have another guess the character. So, this one is interesting because we have a figure sort of similar to an elf. I mean, we get the pointed ears, although Tolkien was rather, not super clear about the whole pointed ears thing. We have one of the swan boats. And from the first two clues, one may guess Galadriel or Celeborn, but those falls make me think Rivendell. And so, based on the clues, I would guess perhaps Elrond. The swan ship, though, is unusual because that's something that was... I mean, swan ships were somewhat common with the elves in general. They tended to build ships that looked like swans. It's just the association with the waterfalls makes me think it's Elrond, There were other elves, of course, that lived at Rivendell, but he was sort of the head guy. I'm very curious about this one because it's difficult. Yeah. Okay, I got it right. In Mordor, what food does Sam reminisce about, which Frodo does not recall the taste of? It was strawberries. Strawberries. They don't talk about any of the other stuff like apple tarts or salted pork or fresh cheese, which are all things that hobbits would absolutely eat. And, of course, strawberries. There's a very disturbing line in The Return of the King about children in the Shire eating strawberries and then stacking the pits like the skulls of fallen enemies. It's sort of this really weird, random, and strangely dark line that Tolkien threw in there at the very end of the book. But, there you go. You gotta think about it. Hobbits, they're known for eating a lot. They eat like 6 meals a day. Although they're not necessarily very, very large meals. And if you think about the size of a hobbit and like a large strawberry to them, that would be like a person eating like a large apple, There's a thought. Literal food for thought. All right, question 14. Who are Elladan and Elrohir? I like this because these are not characters that were in the movie. They are twin sons of Elrond and Celebrian. Galadriel didn't have any sons. Tolkien once spoke about her having possibly a son named Amroth. He later decided that she didn't have any sons, and the character of Amroth was repurposed to be the first king of Lorien. They are Arwen's brothers, so that's another way of putting it. They are her older twin brothers. They're not Eomer's cousins. They're not. Technically, they are Aragorn's cousins. Oh no, 2 of them are correct. It was going so well. It was going so well. They're distantly related, though. Arwen is she's Aragorn's first cousin. Removed about 60 times, though. About 60 generations apart. Well, closer to 59, I guess. So pretty far apart. Technically cousins, so they technically are Aragorn's cousins. A lot of people wouldn't put that together. So I'm going to say this one it's not going to knock a whole lot off of the final score here, but yeah, technically 2 of them are correct. Arwen's brothers, B, is the correct answer, but technically D is correct as well. There's nothing to say about that. It's very correct. They were pretty interesting characters in the book that didn't make it into the film. They could have been just background characters, but for whatever reason they weren't used. What is another name for the dwarves? So they call themselves the Khazad in their own language, which is called Khuzdul, which is sort of a secret language that they don't really share very much with, but Khazad does mean dwarfs. A lot of times their battle cry is Khazad Manu, which means the dwarves are upon you. Khazad-dûm is the dwelling place of the dwarves, also known as the Black Pit Moria. Nogrod is a place, that is a place. Noldorin refers to, it refers to devices of the Noldor, which are a type of elves, and Mazarbul is a place in Khazad-dûm where Balin was interred. But yeah, they're called the Khazad. Kasari, Naugrim, Gonhirim, different languages, different meanings, but they call themselves the Khazad. Who gives Gandalf one of the rings of power? Narya. So, not Celeborn, he never had a ring of power. His wife, Galadriel, did. Elrond had a ring of power. It was given to him by Gil-galad before they went to war with Sauron, but he did not give it to anybody. Celebrimbor technically had all three of those rings, and he initially gave one of them to Galadriel and the other two to Gil-galad. And Gil-galad kept one for himself, but he gave the other one to Círdan, and then Círdan, which really should have an accent above the I, gave it to Gandalf later on. So the correct answer is D, Círdan. He gave him Narya, the red ring. Noé is a good one. You don't hear that one often. Oh, the accent there is on Círdan. You could see it there, but not there. Tolkien sometimes wrote it without the accent, so yes. He was Lord of the Falathrim during the First Age, Master of the Grey Havens, throughout, everything else until he finally sailed to the west, along with Celeborn. What is the name of the book Bilbo, Frodo, and Sam wrote? Okay, so it was the Red Book of Westmarch. Westmarch was a region that was to the west of the Shire. It wasn't technically part of the Shire, nor was it really inhabited, but eventually, the hobbits started, growing more and more, and instead of becoming more urban and packing themselves together, they would prefer to spread outwards and keep their way of life. And one of the things that Aragorn did when he became the king is that he made the Shire bigger, and he did that by giving them the land of Westmarch. As a matter of fact, Sam's eldest daughter's husband, so Sam's, son-in-law, became the first warden of Westmarch. So yeah, it wasn't, of Middle-earth or of the Shire or of Eastmarch. There were other red books, however. The thing is, it became tradition because the initial book that Bilbo wrote in and that he gave to Frodo, and Frodo wrote in and Sam wrote in as well, was known as the Red Book. But it became a tradition that all of the copies of it would be bound in red leather, and it was specifically one of them from Westmarch that made its way to the Undying Lands and then supposedly was brought back to Middle-earth, now known as Europe, into a place that used to be called the Shire, but was now called England, by a person named Elfwine, who brought it to J.R.R. Tolkien to translate. That is the author's conceit, the sort of story that he spins about, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Silmarillion. But that is just one specific copy that is the Red Book of Westmarch. There were other versions of it, but that's the only one that's really correct here. It was never bound in any other color. Which is interesting is that it was written by Bilbo and Frodo and Sam, but it was also written by the elves. A great deal of it was written by the elves, and Bilbo translated it. So that should be mentioned as well. Oh, we're almost done here. Aside from Harfoots and Fallowhides, what is the other race of hobbit? They are called the Stoors. Bucklands is not a real thing. There are hobbits that live in Buckland. They're called Bucklanders, but they're not a race. That's just where they live. The Tooks is a family, and so is the Bulgars. So the only answer here that makes any sense is the Stoors. And you could tell that this gentleman is a Stoor because he has a bit of facial hair. The Stoors were the only hobbits that could have facial hair. Although his feet look strangely bare. I wonder if he's just into shaving his feet or something for some reason. All right, another guess the character here. So we have a beard, we have an Uruk-hai, and we have a Palantir. So from this, we could easily make the assumption that this is Saruman, who devised the Uruk-hai. He was a bearded wizard, and of course he did have one of the Palantir, the one specifically known as the Orthanc Stone. All right, last question, huh? What is the name of the black orbs used as seeing stones? I just said it. So Silmarili refers to gems made by Feanor in the first stage. They're not seeing stones. Sindari would be, I guess... See, now here's the thing. There's no such word as Sindari. You might say that maybe something of a device of the Sindar would be Sindari. Sometimes adding an I at the end would make something plural, like Silmaril becomes Silmarili. But Sindar is already plural, because if a word ends in a vowel, you would add R to make it plural in both Elvish languages. So Sinda is plural, is singular, Sindar is plural. Sindari might mean of the Sindar, but we don't usually use that. Aeglos was the name of a spear that Gil-galad carried, and it was the one that he used to fight Sauron. And, of course, the Palantiri, there should be an accent on the first I there. We just talked about the Palantir, which is singular. There was the Palantiri. They weren't mentioned to all be black, but they're not even all black in the pictures here. But there you have it. What's interesting here is that there are 8 of them. There are actually 7 of them in Middle-earth. They were brought to Middle-earth from Numenor, but there was one in a place called Tol Eressëa, which is part of the Undying Lands, and it is believed that the Elothrian stone, which is the one that Círdan keeps in a tower sort of near the Shire, could be in communication with the one in Tol Eressëa, which was called the Master Stone. We don't know if there were more in the Undying Lands. We just know that there definitely was one in Tol Eressëa. So you could say that there are 7 in Middle-earth and 1 in Tol Eressëa. There possibly may have been more in Numenor when it was destroyed, and there possibly may be more in places like Valinor, Eldamar, or whatever else is out there. What's interesting, though, is for the picture, you might assume that they're all the same size. This is not actually the case. Some of them were small, like the Orthanc stone that Saruman used, or the Anor stone, which is the one that Denethor had. But some of them were very, very large. So, and that they could not be moved by a single man. The one that was in Osgiliath, for example, was supposedly a very large one. The one in Tol Eressëa is also supposed to be very large. So I believe that is the last question. So, not a particularly very difficult quiz, although the one about Elrond I think was tricky, and the one about the Rebus puzzles were the one that was about Elrond and the one that was about Éowyn were a little tricky. But it was a really good quiz with really great presentation. I'm going to give it an A. It would be an A+, except some of the lore given was a little bit off. And that's why I'm saying A instead of A+. I'm not going to knock it down to A-, but I'm going to say it just doesn't reach that. This is so far the best quiz I've taken here. Excellent, excellent work. I want to plug this channel again. This is Quiz Fix. They only have 100 subscribers, so if you like this sort of thing, I don't know if they have other quizzes, related to Tolkien or not, or if it's just a lot of other things. Let's take a look, actually. Well, you have Game of Thrones, you have Harry Potter, you have Marvel, general knowledge. So they have all sorts of things here, but it looks like it's a pretty inactive channel. Yeah, their last upload was 3 years ago, which is a shame because I liked that video. That was very good. That was so far the best of the quizzes that we've seen. Anyway, we're going to do more, so we'll see you guys real soon with more of that.